The courtroom felt cold long before the sentence was spoken. The judge barely looked up as the gavel came down, delivering words that landed like a hammer on one man's future. A harsh sentence. Excessive. Final. The kind that leaves no room for mercy, no space for humanity. Heads shook quietly in the gallery, some in disbelief, others in painful familiarity. Another black man crushed by a system that had learned how to sound neutral while being anything but. But then something shifted. A file was opened. A name was reread. A silence stretched across the room so thick it felt dangerous. The judge's face changed, not with anger, but with something far worse, recognition. In that moment, the entire courtroom realized a story they thought they understood was built on a devastating mistake. If stories like this matter to you, pause for a second and support the channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to Black Voice Story. Your support helps these voices reach the world. Malcolm Reed had learned early that silence could be a weapon and survival skill at the same time. Growing up in a working-class black neighborhood shaped by red lines on city maps and invisible boundaries enforced by fear, he learned how to move carefully through the world. His childhood was marked by sirens at night, classrooms with outdated textbooks, and a justice system he saw only when it failed people who looked like him. Malcolm was not born exceptional in the way movies like pretend heroes are. He was disciplined, observant, and quietly relentless. His mother worked double shifts as a hospital cleaner, coming home exhausted but determined that her son would not inherit the same limits placed on her. His father, a community organizer, taught Malcolm to read court transcripts the same way other parents taught bedtime stories. Justice, Malcolm learned, was not an abstract idea. It was something fought for line by line. School counselors told him law was unrealistic. Teachers praised his writing but suggested practical careers. Still, Malcolm pressed forward, earning scholarships, studying twice as hard, and internalizing the knowledge that excellence would never be enough. It would only make him less dismissible. Law school was where the illusion of fairness finally shattered. Malcolm noticed how his peers spoke about defendants, neighborhoods, and crime with detached certainty, as if entire communities could be summarized in statistics. Professors spoke of precedent without acknowledging the bias baked into it. Malcolm learned the law not just as a system, but as a language, one that could be used to protect or destroy depending on who spoke it. After graduation, he rose quickly. His analytical precision, calm demeanor, and refusal to grandstand made him indispensable. He became known for cases others avoided, complex, politically sensitive prosecutions involving corruption, civil rights violations, and institutional abuse. Eventually, Malcolm Reed became the lead prosecutor in a statewide task force focused on accountability within the justice system itself. But titles did not grant immunity. Outside the courtroom, Malcolm was still a black man navigating a country that often saw him before it understood him. The incident that changed everything began on an ordinary evening. Malcolm was driving home from a long day when flashing lights filled his rearview mirror. The stop escalated quickly. A misunderstanding, a procedural misstep, a charge that should have been resolved with a warning, instead spiraled into an arrest. The details blurred into a familiar script, raised voices, assumptions, and an immediate presumption of guilt. Malcolm said little. He understood how fragile moments like this were. He trusted that the truth, once reviewed, would correct the error. What he underestimated was how deeply the system resented being questioned, even silently. By the time the case reached court, Malcolm was no longer viewed as a respected legal authority. He was reduced to a defendant number, a criminal profile shaped by bias rather than fact. His professional identity was stripped away, not officially, but effectively. The judge assigned to the case had a reputation. Strict, efficient, respected for maintaining order, but also known for disproportionately harsh sentences in cases involving black defendants. Malcolm had read the data. He knew the patterns. Still, he believed facts would matter. He was wrong. From the moment proceedings began, it was clear the outcome had already been imagined. The prosecution framed the incident as defiance rather than confusion, resistance rather than circumstance. Context was flattened. Nuance was ignored. The narrative was familiar and dangerously efficient. Malcolm watched his assumptions fill gaps where evidence should have been. His prior achievements were absent from the record. His professional role was never mentioned, not because it was hidden, but because no one thought to ask. The judge listened with an expression practiced into neutrality, yet subtle signals betrayed something deeper. Interruptions came quickly when Malcolm's defense attempted clarification. Leniency was dismissed as weakness. Each decision leaned in one direction, creating a slope so steep there was no way back up. Observers in the courtroom felt it. That quiet dread that comes when justice is no longer weighing facts but enforcing expectations. Malcolm felt it too, not as fear, but as a heavy familiarity. This was not his first time witnessing injustice. It was simply the first time he was trapped inside it. The sentencing phase arrived with alarming speed. The judge cited deterrence, public safety, and respect for law enforcement. Words that sounded reasonable in isolation, but devastating in context. The punishment proposed exceeded norms. It was excessive, unjustified, and irreversible. As the judge delivered the sentence, Malcolm stood still, not defiant, not broken, just present. He understood something then with painful clarity, that the system did not see him as a man who upheld the law, but as a symbol it felt entitled to discipline. The courtroom absorbed the ruling in stunned silence. Even seasoned attorneys exchanged glances. This was not proportional. This was personal, whether the judge realized it or not. Then came the moment that fractured everything. A clerk, reviewing procedural documentation for finalization, hesitated. A name on a federal case registry did not match the narrative unfolding in the room. Files were cross-referenced. Credentials surfaced, not as a defense strategy, but as an administrative necessity. The realization spread quietly but unmistakably. The man who had just been sentenced was not an ordinary defendant. He was a lead prosecutor on multiple cases that had passed through this very court. He had argued before this judge. His legal work had shaped rulings, convictions, and reforms. The air changed. The judge's voice stopped mid-procedure. The courtroom, once controlled and predictable, fell into an uneasy stillness. No gavel, no instruction, just silence. The judge looked down again at the file, then up at Malcolm, seeing him fully for the first time, not as an assumption, not as a stereotype, but as a colleague, a professional, a man whose authority rivaled his own. The weight of the error settled heavily. This was not just a wrongful sentence. It was exposure. A mirror held up to bias that could no longer hide behind protocol. The judge's reputation, once untouchable, suddenly felt fragile. Court observers understood the implications immediately. If this could happen to a lead prosecutor, what had happened to those without titles, without recognition, without the benefit of delayed realization? The judge requested a recess, an unusual move at this stage. The courtroom buzzed with restrained shock. Legal analysts would later describe the moment as one of the most revealing pauses in recent judicial history. Behind closed doors, the system scrambled. Calls were made, precedents re-examined, ethics questioned. The sentence, once delivered with confidence, now stood as evidence of something far more troubling. When proceedings resumed, the judge spoke again, slower this time. Carefully, the authority remained, but certainty was gone. The sentence was vacated pending review. Language about impartiality and due process filled the air, but the damage was already done. Malcolm felt no triumph, only resolve. He understood that this moment was not about personal vindication. It was about visibility, about forcing a system to confront itself without filters. News of the case spread rapidly. Media outlets framed it as shocking, ironic, unprecedented. But within black communities, the reaction was different. There was no surprise, only confirmation. The question echoed everywhere. How many lives have been altered without the benefit of recognition? The case triggered investigations far beyond one courtroom. Sentencing records were reviewed, patterns analyzed, judicial conduct questioned publicly in ways rarely seen. The judge faced disciplinary scrutiny, not for breaking the law, but for revealing its quiet abuse. Malcolm returned to his work, but he was changed. He began speaking, not with anger, but with precision, about structural bias, about the illusion of neutrality, about how justice fails most efficiently when no one is watching closely. His story became a case study in law schools, a warning in judicial trainings, and a rallying point for reform advocates, not because it was unique, but because it was undeniable. The greatest impact was not the sentence overturned, but the silence that followed its exposure. That pause forced a reckoning no argument could. It proved that racism in the justice system was not always loud. It was procedural, habitual, and devastatingly calm. Malcolm Reed did not ask to become a symbol, but his experience illuminated a truth the system could no longer ignore. Justice cannot exist where assumptions replace understanding. And the most dangerous injustice is the one that feels normal. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently, support the mission. Like the video, share with others, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Black Voice Story. Because these stories are not just history. They are warnings, lessons, and calls to action.